All right, I want to talk about three things that ideally you should avoid when it comes to dietary patterns. So, first one is foods that are high in the glycemic index, which, if you don't know, it's how much a certain food spikes your blood sugar. And this is probably more important than you think. So, at the high GI, so the high glycemic index foods, you have ultra processed foods, you have cereal, you have bread, you have white rice, you have basically liquid calories, cookies, basically junk food in general, but also things that a lot of people still consider to be healthy. For example, whole grain cereal and instant oats and stuff like that. That's also high in glycemic index. And people tend to think that it's only white sugar, for example. But no, it's white sugar, white flour, instant oats, whole grain cereal. There's so many things that fit into that category. And here's a problem. Foods that are high in the glycemic index, it can worsen acne and hair loss. It can worsen acne by the inflammatory pathway. So they spike your blood sugar and your insulin, and that creates an inflammation spike, which can worsen acne. And also, and the science has proven this, it can worsen hair loss by the insulin pathway. So if you have a food that is high in the glycemic index, your blood sugar spikes, so your insulin spikes to drop the blood sugar. Then your male androgen spike. So for example, testosterone spikes. DHT also spikes because it's correlated. And then the spike in insulin also suppresses SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin. It binds to male androgens, it binds to testosterone and DHT. And so the end result is you're going to have more DHT in your scalp. So most of the variance when it comes to hair loss is basically genetic when it comes to what the studies say. But there are certain environmental triggers, and one of them is foods that are high in glycemic index. And this is one of the reasons why tribes that have not adopted modern habits and modern diets, and all they eat is foods that are low in the glycemic index, it's one of those reasons why those people have lower acne rates and lower hair loss rates. Of course, other reasons are genetics as well. They may have lower sensitivity to DHT in the hair follicles, but regardless of androgen receptor sensitivity, we do know it plays a role because we have studies isolating the variables, reaching these conclusions that high GI foods worsen acne and worsen hair loss if you're predisposed to it. So here's a table that shows the GI value of certain foods. So foods that are low in GI, so low in glycemic index, are, for example, fruits, intact whole grains, legumes, vegetables, stuff like that. And then high in GI is refined carbs and ultra-processed foods, white rice, etc. And by the way, really quickly, if you want to know exactly what I eat to reach all the micronutrient targets and eat a diet that is low in the glycemic index, that doesn't promote acne or hair loss, and maximizes health as much as possible, because that is my main obsession, you can check my school community. I show everything I do there. Number 2, advanced glycation end products, also known as AGEs. They act based on two main biochemical pathways. One of them is the AGE receptor binding. That's mostly correlated with the inflammatory aspects of AGEs. And the other one is the protein cross-linking mechanism, which is the one that is impactful when it comes to collagen and elastin production, as well as maintenance. So as you can see on the graph, the more you cook something that has carbs and protein, which is a lot of foods, the more you cook something, the more AGE content it's going to have. So raw foods, they have the lowest AGE content because for the advanced glycation end products to occur, they have to be in the presence of high heat and also of certain molecules, for example, sugars and amino acids. And here's a table that shows the AGE content of certain foods. So as you can see, the common plant-based protein sources, for example, tofu and black beans and other legumes, etc., they're extremely low in AGE content, especially legumes, which are the healthiest plant-based source of protein, and black beans is an example of them. They have the lowest content of AGEs when it comes to this list, and this list is about protein sources, which are usually the main source of AGEs in our diets. And at the top of the list, you have bacon, because it's cooked at really high temperatures. It's basically fried. And yeah, the more you cook something, the more advanced glycation end products you're going to form. Cooked red meat has a ton of AGEs. Cooked chicken, also a ton of AGEs. Cooked salmon as well. It contains a lot of them, although much less. But even if you look at the raw options, even if you look at raw salmon and raw chicken, raw beef, you still have way more AGEs than, for example, black beans, which are legumes, which is the healthiest source of protein when it comes to the plant-based options. There's a lot of fake meats and stuff like that, but that's not the healthiest option. The healthiest options when it comes to plant-based protein sources are legumes, and black beans is one of them, and they have by far the lowest AGE content when it comes to protein sources on this list. Then yeah, like I said, because of the AGE protein cross-linking pathway, it can damage your collagen and elastin, accelerating visible aging. And they also increase your aging speed overall because, like I said, they target inflammatory pathways. They can cause heart disease, cancer, multiple things you don't want. So ideally try to avoid AGEs, and do that by trying to avoid the main culprit of IgEs in our diet, which is cooked meats, especially bacon. But ideally try to avoid those that are high in AGEs because they're going to age you faster. And finally, high saturated fat intake. So the reason why dietary saturated fat is on the list is because saturated fat from diet is a really well-established and strong cause of high serum LDL levels. And we have a ton of data. I'm not even going to show you a study paper because this is way more powerful. This is a combination of hundreds of study papers on this subject. You have the randomized controlled trials, which I've mentioned multiple times. They're at the top of the pyramid. And then you have the prospective cohort studies, which are one level below in the pyramid. And then here you have my favorite kind of studies when it comes to LDL, which are Mendelian randomization studies. So these studies, the Mendelian randomization ones, they pick people that have genetic predispositions. So they study people that have, for example, genetically 5 times the level of LDL or 10 times. And there are also studies where it's the opposite. They pick people that have genetically an LDL of 10 or an LDL of 20. And the result is a very, very strong correlation between high LDL and high heart disease rates. Now, of course, heart disease is complex. It's not just low density lipoprotein. There are other factors at play. For example, to have a heart attack, you kind of need multiple things at once. Generally speaking, you need inflammation, you need LDL, you need high blood pressure, and this creates an environment where all the mechanisms, they synergize together to create heart disease, basically, which is what you don't want. And you don't just want to avoid high LDL, you also want to avoid high inflammation and high blood pressure, as well as high LDL. So you have to try to avoid all those, and they're all independent risk factors. So they're all extremely important when it comes to avoiding heart disease and living longer overall. So if you care about longevity, you should care about having a low LDL. And generally speaking, I believe LDL is kind of like UVA and UVB and DHT. The lower the better. It's just a risk to reward ratio problem. If you look at statin studies, the randomized controlled trials, you're going to see the same thing. Even if you look at the independent ones, you're going to see that the rate of success when it comes to positive outcomes is almost 100%. And the rate of failure or of negative side effects is almost 0%. So it's kind of like finasteride when it comes to risk to reward ratio profile. So yeah, try to lower your LDL as well as other metrics, for example, inflammation and blood pressure. And if you want to know how I optimize all of that at the same time, everything I do when it comes to health and diet to achieve top 1% health, you can join the school community. I talk about everything I eat to reach all the micronutrients. What foods should you eat to avoid a high GI diet, and also to avoid cancer, heart disease, to have longevity, to have health, to have zero deficiencies, to optimize development, etc. These are things that I didn't know during development. If I did, maybe I would be more attractive, who knows? But most of you watching are probably in your 20s. But regardless of your age, almost everyone would benefit from being healthier, unless you're already perfect when it comes to health, which is very unlikely. And yeah, if you're curious on everything I do when it comes to diet and exercise, etc., how I reach all the micronutrient targets, you can join the school community, and you also support the channel, which I would appreciate because I can actually make more videos and give you more value in videos like this. So yeah, that's basically it. And I really hope you join the school community because I truly think that it's a win-win scenario where you learn new stuff and I gain a new member. So yeah, that's pretty much it.